What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So the king of unsolicited opinions strikes again. Let me give you a second to marinate on who that might be. It's Nate Diaz. I saw this article where it referred to Nate as the king of unsolicited opinions. I was like, damn, that's clever. That is absolutely clever, and that is absolutely a perfect description of who Nate Diaz is. So this video has to do with three people: Nate Diaz, Dustin Poirier, and Paddy Pimblett. For those of you who don't know, Dustin Poirier has been in consistent talks with the UFC about what his farewell fight for the UFC may be. As you know, after his last title shot at lightweight champion Islam Makhachev, which was a pretty good performance by Dustin, to be fair. Seeing as how he lasted up until the last round, was not finished until the last round, actually made the Russian bleed. That's more than what a lot of other opponents have been able to do, right? But he has made a comment online that legends only when it comes to his last fight. He's looking at a trilogy, possibly, with Justin Gaethje. Recently, the UFC apparently approached Dustin Poirier with the idea of fighting a number 12 ranked Paddy Pimblett. Okay? And Dustin Poirier put the brakes, shut that down with a quickness online, responding legends only, and that it absolutely 100% would not be Paddy Pimblett as his last fight. And then the king of unsolicited opinions breaks out with, "Oh, fight Paddy, pussy." I was like, this is so typical of Nate Diaz. And I sat there and I started thinking about it, and I was like, of course, the first thing I thought is, who did Nate Diaz fight for his last fight? And then I thought about it. I was like, didn't he get gifted a last minute fight with a 4-fight losing streak, heavily declining Tony Ferguson? Which, you know, at that time, Tony was still kind of in that in between stage where, people were starting to talk about his decline, but at this point, he's lost like, I think, 8 in a row or something crazy. I think at this point, Tony actually holds the record for like the quickest and fastest decline, and instead of the most wins in a row, he's got like the most consecutive losses in a row, I think, of anyone in the UFC or some crap. Don't quote me on that. That's probably wrong, but it's on up there. He's on up there in terms of consecutive losses, right? And so it's the irony is palpable, right? And I just want to ask you guys, what do you think? Dustin Poirier obviously has held the interim belt. He's never been undisputed champion, but outside of that fact, you cannot get a more accomplished, storied career than a guy like Dustin Poirier. Never in boring fights, always fighting the top of the division, the cream of the crop. He himself has been up towards the top of the lightweight division literally his whole career that he's been in the UFC and that he's been in the lightweight division. I understand he fought at first at featherweight for a little while. Since he's been at lightweight, Dustin has, as far as I know, never been out of the top 10. I've never known Dustin to be out of the top 10. Right? Had some absolute wars with people like Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje, 2 fights against Conor McGregor, well, 2 in the lightweight division, 1 against Conor in featherweight. Obviously, the title shot against Islam Makhachev. He's fought Charles Oliveira for the title. This guy has fought the who's who of the sport, right? And, I understand at the end of the day, the UFC is the boss. And this is something that people love to debate, right? Do these guys and should these guys get to a point within their careers where they should have a certain amount of say-so about who they fight next, especially if you're considering a fighter like Dustin Poirier, who has challenged for the title 3 different times, is the cream of the crop, is a very, very decorated UFC fighter, and this, as far as we know, according to Poirier, could potentially be his last fight in the UFC ever before he puts the gloves down, walks away completely from the sport, right? Should a guy in Dustin Poirier's position be able to at least have some sort of say so on who he fights next, who he fights last? Or should he be able to make the decision altogether, almost completely separate of the UFC? Should Dustin Poirier be able to raise his hand and say, I want to fight this guy because that guy excites me. These guys don't. And that's just what it is. And if that's not what I'm going to get, then I can go ahead and walk away now because you can retire whenever you want to. I mean, if you're worth a lot of money like Dustin Poirier is, he obviously doesn't need the money at this point. So for him, he's, now I'll just walk away if you give me somebody I don't want to fight, right? But a lot of people will give him shit about this, including now Nate Diaz, because you do have to look, and with somebody like me, I love Dustin Poirier. I love watching that guy fight. I mean, he has been one of my all-time favorites. I have an 18-year-old son who loves to watch the UFC too. The fight that caused my son to fall in love with the UFC was Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier. He and I sat and watched that fight together. And from that moment on, my son was hooked on the UFC, right? Dustin Poirier is that type of fighter. But you look at a guy like Paddy Pimblett, obviously is ranked number 12. He's not even in the top 10. Paddy wants to fight. Obviously, Paddy wants it. Getting a fight with a guy like the Diamond is going to propel his career into the stratosphere even further than it already has, right? So obviously, he wants that fight. He wants that name on his resume. And while Paddy Pimblett has quite a big name, especially over in his country, well, I mean, not just in this country, he's amassed quite a following and quite a big name for himself in the sport, despite the fact that he's only ranked number 12. But with that said, you can see from a stylistic and fight breakdown sort of perspective why that fight and that style of fight could potentially be a little bit of a concern for Dustin Poirier. Obviously, Dustin Poirier wants to go out on a win. When you have the type of career that Dustin Poirier has had, you want to go out on a win, right? And, for him to talk about legends only, this and that, and then, no, I'm not going to fight anybody out of the top 10. That's, rule number 1 from what we can understand. He doesn't want to fight anyone that's ranked higher than number 10. Although he hasn't said that, that's kind of you just kind of gather that that's where his head is at, right? And he doesn't want to fight anyone that doesn't excite him because it was, Beneil Dariush has been calling for a fight with Dustin Poirier for years now, for at least 3 years. Beneil Dariush has been calling for a fight with Dustin Poirier. Beneil Dariush is ranked in the top 10. Beneil Dariush has been floating around in and out of that top 7, 6, 8 at the highest range for quite a while now. He's been there a while, right? But that fight, according to Dustin Poirier, doesn't excite him, despite the fact that Beneil Dariush has the ranking. He has the resume. He's fought good guys. And he and Dustin Poirier, despite both having been in the top 10 for quite a while now, have figured out a way to orbit around one another for quite a few years in the lightweight division and still have not crossed paths. Dustin doesn't want it. Doesn't want it. Says that fight doesn't excite him. I did a whole separate video on that. Why is that? And I think that has to do with the persona of Beneil Dariush. He's not a flashy, exciting sort of guy. He's just very quiet, very soft spoken individual, but a good, solid fighter. A good, well rounded, all around fighter. A fighter that, with his jiu-jitsu experience especially, you could see giving maybe a little bit of trouble to Dustin Poirier. Now, I think Dustin beats Beneil Dariush if that fight happens, but that's a side note. We're talking about Paddy Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett is a person that people are going to look at this and people are going to ride Dustin's shit and they're going to say, "What's wrong, bro? You afraid you're going to lose?" I mean, Paddy has the name, right? Paddy Pimblett has a big enough name that it should excite somebody like Dustin Poirier. He doesn't have the ranking, but he's got a big enough name. And more importantly, I think he has a style that would be intriguing for a lot of fans because he's got a really, really strong ground attack, right? As we know, in the past, Dustin has struggled and struggled big when it comes down to being in fights with guys who can really control the pace and control the action on the ground. Dustin's a boxer. Dustin's more of a stand-up, well, a kickboxer, more of a stand-up guy. I know he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He has quite an extensive background in grappling, but we don't see him use it. He prefers to stand up, of course, right? Because that's where he's best. That's where he's most effective. There are very few guys in the upper echelon of that UFC lightweight division that have the sort of boxing skills that somebody like a Dustin Poirier, who's trained by a professional boxing trainer, Diaz. Understood? So that's where his bread is buttered in the striking. And Paddy Pimblett does a little bit of both. Fair enough, he's a decent striker. He's not going to be able to strike with Dustin Poirier. I can tell you that. But it's not a boxing match. It's not a kickboxing match either. It's an MMA fight where grappling, kicking, punching, elbowing, kneeing, all of the above are perfectly permitted and perfectly legal. From that perspective, I can see that being a fight that Dustin would worry about a little bit. You know, I mean, he took the fight with Benoit Saint Denis that everyone was kind of surprised about because Benoit wasn't ranked in the top 10. He took that fight, but I believe that he saw something in Benoit that he does not see in Beneil Dariush. Benoit had that sort of mysterious French special forces guy with a cool ass tattoo, on his chest. Finished his last fight with basically a running high kick. I mean, he had that it factor, And Beneil Dariush, despite being a really, really well-rounded fighter, has never really had that it factor. Is it hard to explain? Is it because he has more gray hair than I do and I'm almost 50? Is it because he's a quiet guy? Is it because he doesn't have the look? Is it because he's not tatted up? I mean, what is it about Beneil Dariush that doesn't excite Dustin Poirier? Could be a combination of all those things. It could be that it wouldn't be a great lead up to a fight because Beneil's just a quiet, Christian guy, right? But then by the same token, you look at Paddy Pimblett and you're like, well, now Paddy Pimblett is, a loudmouth Liverpool native that would absolutely sell a fight. Paddy Pimblett absolutely has a big name. Paddy Pimblett is absolutely a rising star in this UFC lightweight division, okay? Just like Benoit Saint Denis is. That's Paddy Pimblett's right there. And I would say as far as name value is even bigger than Benoit Saint Denis. Like, where is Dustin's head? Where is his head to where he doesn't want to take a fight, his last fight, with a guy like Paddy Pimblett? I'm not saying that I disagree with him. I mean, in my personal opinion, Dustin's earned his right. He's earned his keep. He's fought the best. He's fought everybody that they've put in front of him, and most of them, he's knocked him down. They've stood him up. He's knocked him down, even when it was a tough challenge, right? So completely give Dustin credit for that. But so before you jump in the comments and start giving me shit, oh, they're hating on Dustin, bro. I love Dustin. Dustin Poirier is absolutely one of my favorite fighters in the UFC of all time. Of all time. Dustin is one of my favorites. And I'm not just saying this because the video is about him. I just love his style, right? He's so fun to watch. But what do you guys think? Why is it that Dustin Poirier would not take a fight with somebody like Paddy Pimblett for his last fight, but he was willing to fight a Benoit Saint Denis recently, right? And I planned, when I first thought about doing this, I planned on making it more about Nate Diaz's punk ass for calling Dustin Poirier out when his last fight was a 4-fight losing skid, Tony Ferguson, which has aged like milk sitting out on the counter at room temperature because Nate Diaz won that fight, his last fight in the UFC, and now Tony Ferguson has gone on to lose back to back to back to back, like I think 4 more fights now. So you look back on Nate Diaz's last fight, and you're like, oh, bro, you got your last fight against a guy who had a big name, but was obviously declining quickly, right? Had already started to decline and has continued to decline since that time. And he's a bigger guy at 170 than somebody like Tony Ferguson. So, Nate Diaz had all of the advantages there. It looked like 2 old guys standing in the corner of a nursing home fighting in there. It was obvious both of them were well past their prime, but either way, Nate Diaz, they described it perfectly. The king of unsolicited opinions. Like, bro, you're not even in the UFC anymore. Shut up. Leave Dustin alone. And besides, we all remember who you fought for your last fight, right? I mean, there's quite a big difference in a Tony Ferguson, who has already lost 4 fights in a row, and a Paddy Pimblett, who has been on a tear ever since he's been in the UFC. Now, it's definitely safe to be said Paddy Pimblett has not fought the strength of schedule and the level of competition of a Dustin Poirier. I mean, that's obvious. That's obvious, right? But still, the name is there. And if Dustin really believes that Paddy has not faced someone as good as him, has not faced that level of competition, and when he gets to that level of competition, it's going to be a hard stop for the Paddy Pimblett train, right? If you really believe that, take on that challenge, bro. Take the challenge. I think everyone would respect the hell out of Dustin Poirier if he say, you know what? Yeah, yeah, give me Paddy Pimblett. Give me that guy. I'm going to show you before I retire. I'm going to show you that there's levels to this thing. And then, if he were to beat Paddy Pimblett, he could take all of that shine that is on Paddy Pimblett right now, worldwide, not just in America. He's huge over in Europe. Take that shine, and he could rub it on his retired head. I was going to say bald head, but he didn't have a bald head. But he could rub it all over his head. What a hell of a way to go out being the dude, the man, the dog that said anywhere, anytime, any person, you give me the time and the date, stand them up, and I'm knocking them down. From beginning until my very last fight, that's how I roll. Give me Paddy Pimblett. I think people would respect it. I would respect it. That'd be a huge fight, bro. That'd be a huge fight. But Dustin has put a stop to that train really quick. And sometimes I just wonder why. Like, I get why that Paddy Pimblett's not highly ranked, but Paddy Pimblett does have a huge name, though. And it should piss Dustin off that this new young Liverpool punk is coming in trying to take the shine off of that paid in full name of the Diamond, Dustin Poirier. Dustin seems like the kind of guy that would piss him off. that the UFC is trying to do that to him. That would piss him off that Paddy is trying to come up and make his name even bigger off of a guy like Dustin who has paid in full everything that he's done in the UFC. That's his mantra. Paid in full. I follow him on Instagram. See it all the time. What do you guys think? I mean, I wonder if there's enough pressure put on him to fight Paddy Pimblett if he would actually do it. Just out of curiosity. Hey, I would love to see, him versus Gagey, a third time. I would love to see him, versus another, you know, top guy. I mean, there's some people up there, Dan Hooker's already fighting Justin Gagey, so it couldn't be either one of them anytime soon. Dustin would have to sit out and wait. I don't know if he wants to do that or is willing to do that. I mean, I would love to see it. It'd be a great fight. It's Dustin Poirier, bro. He could fight a freaking the mop in the janitor's closet, and I'm gonna watch it. But I don't know, man. I'm like, what's wrong with Paddy? Be that dude. Be that dude that says, that's the name of the game. These young bloods come in and they think they're ready for these, top guns, these top G's that have been doing it for years and years and years. Yeah. Let my last fight be the one that puts the brakes on the hype train of Paddy Pimblett and sends his ass back up the rankings. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Let me know, who do you think Dustin Poirier's last fight should be against? Who do you think? Subscribe to the channel if you would. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you on the next one. All right, peace.